She came out of the dark with a knife in her hand, and not one word I could understand. I'd lived 41 years believing I knew the difference between a threat and a stranger. That night I learned there is no difference until somebody decides there is. She spoke a language that had been on this land 10,000 years before my name was, and I spoke the language of the men who were hunting her. Everything between us was distance. Language was distance. The soldiers were distance. My own fear was the widest distance of all. But here's the thing nobody warns you about, that you can love a person before you can say a single true word to them, that you can be understood without being spoken to, and that the hardest thing a man will ever do is not fight for what he loves. It's letting it go and never knowing if it made it home. This is the story of the winter a stranger with different words walked into my life, and how far a man will ride to close a distance that was never his fault and never hers. Stay with me. Part 1 starts the night the rain came sideways. I keep a ledger. Not because I'm good with money, Lord knows the bank in Wilcox has a lower opinion of my arithmetic than I do, but because my wife Marta kept one, and when she died the keeping of it fell to me like everything else fell to me, the fences and the well rope and the 200 head of scrawny cattle that don't know they're grieving too. So I write it all down. Rain when there is any. A calf born, a calf lost. What I owe the feed store, and what the feed store will never let me forget I owe. Marta used to say a ledger is just a man's memory told honest, because a man's own memory lies to make him feel better, and the numbers won't do him that kindness. The night it started, I had just written no rain, 31 days in the column, and the numbers were about to become a liar, because the sky broke open around midnight and threw down a cold, hard rain that came at the walls sideways like it had a grudge. I was up because I'm always up. Sleep and I signed a separation 2 years back. So I heard the barn, a knock and shuffle that wasn't the wind, wasn't the mare, wasn't anything a barn does by itself. I took the Winchester off the pegs and the lantern I didn't light, and I went out into that rain in my socks and my dead wife's oilcloth coat, because it was nearer the door than mine. I want you to understand I was not brave. My hands were cold and my heart was going like a rabbit's, and every step across that yard I was making bargains with a god I'd mostly stopped talking to. Let it be a coyote. Let it be a drifter I can run off. Let it be nothing. It was not nothing. She was in the far stall, pressed into the corner where I keep the broken tack, and she came up off the wall the second the barn door groaned. There was a knife in her hand, a short blade, bone-handled, held low and steady the way you hold a thing you've held before. Her hair was black and rained flat against her face, and she was soaked clean through, shaking so hard I could see it from 10 feet, and her eyes in the gray light were not scared. That's what I noticed first, and it's what I've never forgotten. Cornered, half-frozen, one woman against a man with a rifle, and her eyes were not scared. They were deciding. She said something. Low, fast, 3 or 4 words in a language I'd heard maybe twice in my life at a distance, at the edge of a market, from men the town called by ugly names. Apache. I didn't know then whether it was Chiricahua or the San Carlos bands or what. I'm ashamed to say I couldn't have told you the difference, the way she surely could have told a Texan from a Georgian by one sentence. To me, it was just not English, and not Tinglish on the frontier in the winter of '86 meant one thing to most men, and that thing was enemy. I don't know why it didn't mean that to me. Maybe because I was tired. Maybe because Marta was Sonoran, born below the line, and half the men in this valley had said ugly things about her too, right up until the fever took her, and then suddenly they all remembered they'd loved her cooking. Maybe I was just too worn down to do the expected thing. I lowered the rifle, slow. I set it against the stall post where she could see me set it, and I raised both my hands empty, and I said the only thing I could think of, which was, "You're bleeding." Because she was. Left forearm, a long, shallow cut going pink in the rainwater, dripping off her fingers onto the straw. She glanced down at it and back up at me, and I watched her run the arithmetic. This fool put his gun down. Is it a trap? Does it matter? I am freezing, and something in the ledger of her own quick mind came out in my favor. She didn't lower the knife, but she stopped deciding whether to use it. I backed to the wall where Marta's saddle blankets hung, the good wool ones, and I took 2 down slow and set them on the rail between us and backed off again, all the way to the door. Then I pointed at her, and pointed at the blankets, and pointed at the house, and I felt like the biggest fool in the territory, a grown man playing charades in his socks in a barn at midnight. But she watched my hands like they were words, because they were the only words we had. She took the blankets. She did not take the offer of the house. She wrapped herself standing up, knife still in her fist, watching me the whole time, and when I understood she wasn't coming in out of the wet, I did the only useful thing left to me. I went and got the fire going in the house and left the barn door cracked, and I sat on my own porch in the cold with a rifle across my knees, not aimed at anything, just there, so she'd know the yard was watched and the watching wasn't against her. I don't think either of us slept. Around 3, the rain quit. Around 4, I heard her moving. I didn't look. Some instinct told me that a woman who'd been running long enough to end up in a stranger's barn needed to not be looked at for a while. When Gray came up over the Chiricahuas, she was still there. That surprised me. I'd have bet the ranch she'd be gone by first light, blade and blankets both, and I wouldn't have blamed her. But her horse was lame. I found that out at dawn, a stringy paint pony tied in the wash behind my barn, favoring the near foreleg, a stone bruise gone bad. That's why she'd stopped. Not for me, for the horse. And when I came around the corner and saw her crouched by that pony's leg, packing it with mud and some green mash she'd chewed herself, murmuring to it in that low water-over-stones language, I understood something about her before I understood one word she spoke. She was the kind who wouldn't leave a lame animal to save her own skin. Neither would Marta, said the part of my head that still talks in my wife's voice. You married one of those, you know the type. I should tell you what was happening in the world outside my 40 acres, because it matters, and because for a long while I only half knew it myself. That winter the newspapers were full of Geronimo. He'd surrendered in September down in Skeleton Canyon. You could have heard the whole territory exhale, and the army had loaded him and near 500 Chiricahua onto trains bound for Florida. Warriors, old men, women, children, the Apache scouts who'd worked for the army, all of them, no sorting, all shipped east to rot in a fort by a swamp. Men in Wilcox toasted it in the saloons, cleaned 'em out at last. But 500 people don't all fit neat on a train, and in the mountains and the washes there were still small bands and lone travelers and folks who'd slipped the roundup or gotten separated in the chaos of it, moving at night, trying to reach kin in the Sierra Madre below the border where the army's writ ran thin. And where there are people the army wants and can't easily reach, there are men who'll do it for pay. Bounties, quiet ones nobody wrote down. A scalp, a captive delivered to the fort, cash money, and no questions from a country that had decided these particular people didn't count. I didn't know that first morning that she was one of the separated. I didn't know she'd been walking north when she should have been walking south because she was looking for a sister who'd been on a different part of the roundup, and hadn't yet let herself believe the sister was already on a train, already gone, already 3 states east, and getting farther every hour. I didn't know any of it because I couldn't ask, and she couldn't tell me, and for the first 3 days everything I learned about her I learned the way you learn about weather, by watching the sky and getting rained on. Here is what I learned in those 3 days. She would not eat until the pony ate. I set food out: beans, biscuit, a strip of jerked beef, and she left it until she'd seen to that horse's leg, and even then she ate facing the road, back to the barn wall, knife within reach. When I chopped wood she watched my hands, always the hands, and I came to understand she was reading me the way I read the ledger, checking whether the numbers of me added up honest. When I split my thumb on the axe and cussed and bled, she looked at the wound, then at my face, and something in her shoulders eased a half-inch. Because I think a man who bleeds and swears and doesn't die is a man you can start to make sense of. On the second day she pointed at herself and said a word. I heard it as best I could, and I'll write it the way it landed on my ear, though I know I never once said it the way she meant it. Dassa. 2 beats, the second one falling soft like a thing set down gentle. I said it back and I said it wrong, and she almost smiled. She shook her head and said it again, patient, the way you'd teach a child. And I tried again and got it less wrong, and she let me keep the less wrong version because we both knew it was the best I had. Then she pointed at me, waiting. Ezra, I said, and I pointed at myself. Ezra. She tried it. It came out Esla, the R gone soft into an L, and I liked it better than my own name. Nobody had said my name gentle in 2 years. Even wrong, it undid something in my chest I'd been keeping wound tight since the day I put Marta in the ground under the cottonwood by the wash. So there we were, Esla and Dassa, a widower and a stranger, 40 acres and a lame horse, and 100 miles of country in every direction that wanted her dead. 2 people with maybe 6 words between them. It should not have been enough. It was the most understood I'd felt in 2 years. On the third day the trouble came, the way trouble always comes, in daylight on horseback, wearing a friendly face. I was at the well when I heard riders, and the fear that went through me was so fast and so total that I understood, in that one instant, that somewhere in 3 days I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Because a smart man, a safe man, a man with 200 head and a bank note and a place in this valley, that man would have been relieved to see riders. That man would have handed her over. There was money in it and no shame that the town would recognize. I was not relieved. I was terrified for her, and the terror had her name in it. The wrong said version, Dassa, and I turned, and she was already gone, vanished into the barn, into the broken tack corner. And I heard the small sounds of her pulling straw and a horse blanket over the paint pony to hide it, quick and silent. A woman who'd done this before. 3 riders. I knew 2 of them. Harl Mercer, who ran cattle up the valley and had wanted my water rights since before Marta died, and his cousin Dell, who was mean the way a dog's mean when it's been kicked into it. The third I didn't know, a lean gray man with a Mexican saddle and a coil of thin rope on his horn that wasn't for cattle, and a way of sitting his horse like he was appraising everything he looked at for resale. He was the one who scared me. Harl and Dell were just cruel. This one was a professional. Ezra, Harl reined up at my gate, friendly as a snake. You look like hell. Haven't slept, true enough. What brings you out? Trouble's what? Harl spat. Cutter here, he tipped his head at the gray man, cut sign of an Apache buck 2 days south. Lone traveler headed this direction. Army's paying for strays that slipped the roundup. He said strays like they were cattle. We're asking round, you see anybody, anything out of place. And here is the moral weight of it, the thing this whole story was built to arrive at. And it arrived on the 3rd day at my own front gate with the sun on my neck. I could see, from where I stood, the corner of Marta's oilcloth coat where I'd left it on the porch rail. Dassa had worn it in the rain. It smelled of her now, wood smoke, and that green medicine she chewed. If Cutter's professional eye went to that porch, if he saw a woman's coat on a widower's rail and thought to ask who's wearing your dead wife's coat, Ezra, the whole thing came apart. I had a choice. 2 words would have done it. In the barn. Cash money, no questions, and the town would have called it good sense. Haven't seen a soul, I said. Been holed up with the ague 3 days. Ask my mare, she's the only company I've had. Cutter looked at me. Just looked, the appraising look, and I made myself look tired and sick and stupid, which wasn't hard. And I let my eyes drift to the porch and the coat casual as anything. Because I'd learned from playing poker with Marta that the thing you're hiding, you don't hide your eyes from. You glance at it and glance away bored, and the bored is what sells it. You hear anything, Harl said. You fire 2 shots. Rewards split 3 ways, but there's enough to make it worth a 4th. He grinned. Neighborly. Neighborly, I agreed, and my voice didn't shake, and I have wondered ever since where a coward found that. They turned to go. And then Dell, mean, stupid Dell, walked his horse a few steps toward the barn, just idling just to make me sweat, and said, Water your horse before we ride on. The pony, if he went in the barn, if the paint so much as stamped. Well's low, I said too fast, and Cutter's gray eyes came back to me, and I knew he'd heard the too fast, filed it, weighed it. Drought's got it down to mud. You'll want the tank at the Circle R, it's spring-fed. A long, long second. Then Cutter said, mild, Circle R it is, and turned his horse, and the other 2 followed because he was clearly the one who decided things. And I stood at my gate and watched 3 men who'd have killed her for pocket money ride off toward the Circle R, and I did not breathe right until they were dust. When I went in the barn, she was standing in the corner with the bone knife in her hand and the other hand flat against the paint's nose, keeping it quiet, and her eyes came to mine, and I watched her understand what I'd done. Not the words, she couldn't have caught the words, but the shape of it. 3 armed men, and I was still standing here alone, and she was still alive. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she did something she had not done in 3 days. She let the knife drop, point down into the straw and left it there, and stepped over it toward me with both hands empty. She said 1 word, soft, I didn't know it. I know now it means thank you. But that day, I only knew it by the way she said it, and by the fact that a woman who'd held a blade between us for 3 days had set it down in the dirt and left it there. That was the night the distance started to close. And that was the night I first understood that closing it might cost me everything I had left, which wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was all I had. Outside, the wind came up off the Chiricahuas, cold as ever, carrying the far-off sound of 3 horses that would be back. I knew they'd be back. Cutter had heard the two fast. Men like that always come back. I want to tell you about the hawk, because that's when I fell, if you can call it falling, and because it's the truest thing I know about her. 4 days after Cutter rode off, I lost a calf to the wash. Spring runoff had cut the bank soft, and the little fool went in after green shoots and couldn't climb out, bawling, sunk to the belly in mud. And I got a rope on it, but I couldn't pull it and hold the bank both, and I was going down myself, boots sliding, when Dassa came off the rise at a dead run. She didn't ask what to do. She saw it in one look, same as she saw everything in one look, and she went up bank of me, wrapped my own rope around a cottonwood root in a hitch I didn't know, and took up the slack so the tree pulled and I only had to steer. We got the calf out. It stood there shaking, coated brown, alive and furious about it. And Dassa, on her knees in the mud, breathing hard, looked at that ugly saved calf and laughed. First time I'd heard it. A real laugh, low and surprised out of her, like it had escaped before she could stop it. She clapped a muddy hand over her own mouth like she was embarrassed to have such a sound in her, in this country, in this year, with her sister on a train and her people on a train, and the whole world telling her there was nothing left to laugh about. I put it in the ledger that night, not the calf, the laugh. She laughed today. Marta would have understood why a man writes that down. The hawk was the next morning. There was a redtail that hunted my fence line, and it had gotten itself tangled in a snarl of old wire I'd been meaning to clear for a year, wing bound up, thrashing, screaming that awful hawk scream. I'd have shot it to end it. That's the ranch way. You don't let a thing suffer, and you don't waste a morning saving what can't be saved. I went for the rifle. Dassa put her hand on the barrel. She looked at me and shook her head once and went to the hawk. And I watched a woman who'd held a knife on me for 3 days kneel down to a wild thing all beak and talon and talk to it, that low-water language, steady, unhurried, and get her hands into the wire while it fought her, and take 2 cuts across her forearms for her trouble and not stop. Not once. She worked that wing free wire by wire while it tore at her, and when it was loose she didn't let go, proud and gentle like a story. She flung it up hard away from her so it wouldn't rake her on the launch, practical to the end. It went up crooked, caught itself, flew. She sat back on her heels with her arms bleeding and watched it go with an expression I have spent 2 years trying to name and can't. It wasn't triumph. It was something older than that, like she was watching something get to go where she couldn't. That's when I understood what she was doing on my ranch in the wrong direction, going north. She was looking for someone who'd already flown. And I think, kneeling in my dirt with her arms opened up by that ungrateful hawk, she was starting to know it and refusing to know it both at once, the way you do. I went and got the green medicine she used. I'd watched her make it, sage and something else, and I packed her arms myself, clumsy, and she let me. She let me. Held her arm out and watched my hands do the work, and when I tied off the last strip, she covered my hand with hers for the length of one breath. Just that. Her hand, scarred and strong and cold, over mine. I'm not going to pretty it up. I was 41 years old and 2 years a widower, and I had not been touched with tenderness in so long that one cold hand over mine for one breath went through me like the first rain after a drought. You don't even know how dry you were until the water hits, and you understand you'd been half dead standing up. Neither of us said anything. We couldn't have. That was the mercy of it, maybe, that we had no words to ruin it with. We built a language that winter, not Apache, not English, ours. She taught me the words for the things we did together because those were the words that stuck. Water, fire, horse, calf, cold, come, wait, danger. She'd say hers, I'd say mine, and we'd pick whichever one felt truer for that thing, so our talk became a stitched-together thing, half hers and half mine, and no one else on earth spoke it. I learned that her word for the paint pony's white patches was the same as her word for the clouds. I learned that when she was worried, she went quiet and worked her thumb against the bone handle of her knife, round and round. A nervous habit I came to read like weather. I learned she watched the South every evening, always the South, and I understood the South was where her people had gone, the ones still free, into the Sierra Madre below the line, and that every day she stayed with me was a day she was not walking toward them. I learned her name properly, too, not the sound Dassa, my broken version, but the meaning. She showed me one evening by the fire. She pointed to herself, said her true name, then pointed at a stand of reeds down by the wash, the kind that bend flat in a flood and don't break and come back up when the water goes. She bent her hand like the reed bending, let it spring back up. Her name was the reed that bends and doesn't break. I looked at her arms, still healing from the hawk. I looked at her watching the South with her sister 3 states gone. I thought, yes, that's exactly right. That is exactly what you are. I never did learn to say it, but I knew it, and I think being known matters more than being pronounced. The setback came in February, and it came because of me, because of my own weakness, and I've never forgiven myself the shape of it. I got careless. Happy men get careless, and God help me, I was happy, happier than a man has a right to be with his neighbors hunting the woman at his table. We'd fallen into a rhythm. She had the pony sound again and could have left any day. She didn't. I told myself she stayed because the country South was still thick with soldiers, and that was true. I didn't let myself hear the other reason, the one that was also true, the one that lived in the way she'd started saving me the warm spot by the fire, and the way I'd started riding my fence line slow, so I could watch her work the garden she'd made from my dead wife's neglected plot. Careless, I went to Wilcox for feed and salt, and I was gone from the ranch a whole day, and I bought 2 of everything I needed, and old man Prude at the mercantile, who misses nothing, who has made a religion of missing nothing, looked at my order and said, "Feeding an army out there, Ezra?" and laughed, and I laughed too, easy, and said something about hoarding against the drought, and it was fine. It was not fine, because Cutter was in the mercantile, in the back, quiet, buying cartridges. And Cutter's professional eye went over my order, 2 sacks of flour where a lone widower buys 1, the little tin of the good tea that no rancher drinks, a bolt of trade cloth, wax combs, a woman's things folded in among a man's, and Cutter said nothing at all, which I didn't notice, because a man saying nothing is the easiest thing in the world not to notice. I rode home with my 2 of everything and my full heart, and Cutter rode out the next morning to watch my ranch from the ridge with a spyglass, patient as the professional he was, and it took him 2 days to see her. And on the 3rd day he had what he needed, and he went to fetch Harl and Dell, because a bounty splits better with guns to back it. I know all this because Dassa knew it before I did. Of course she did. She'd been hunted her whole life. I'd been hunting nothing more dangerous than a lost calf. On the 2nd evening she went still by the fire, thumb working the knife handle, and she pointed at the ridge and said our word for danger, and then she said something long and low that I couldn't follow, and then she did the thing that broke me. She started packing. Quiet, efficient, no tears, a woman who'd packed a run 100 times. She rolled Marta's good wool blankets. I'd given them to her outright by then, and she saw to the pony's foot, and she filled a skin at the well, and she did it all in the dark without a lamp because light draws eyes, and I stood in my own house watching the only good thing left in my life get ready to walk out into a country that would kill her, and I understood she was leaving to save me. Because a woman found alone is a bounty. But a woman found in a white man's house, that white man hangs, or worse. She was going to walk into the guns alone so that when they took her, they'd take only her. The reed that bends and doesn't break, bending herself flat to keep the flood off me. I couldn't say any of what was in me. 6 months of learning her language, and I still didn't have the words for don't, for stay, for I will not survive you the way I barely survived Marta, for I would rather hang than watch you walk south alone. All the important things live in the part of language you never get to with a stranger, so I did the only thing I had. I went to the peg where Marta's ledger hung, and under it hung my rifle, and I took the rifle down, and I took my heavy coat, and I took the map I'd drawn of the country south from years of chasing strays, the washes and the water and the one passed through the border hills the army didn't watch because it was too rough for a column. And I stood in front of the door. She looked at the rifle, she looked at the coat, she looked at the map in my hand. And I watched her understand, the way she understood everything in one look. I wasn't stopping her from going south. I was going with her. She shook her head, hard. She said something sharp, the first sharp thing she'd said to me in months, and I knew it meant no, you fool, you'll die, you'll hang, this is not your fight. And she was right. It was not my fight. I had 40 acres and 200 head and a name in the valley and a wife under the cottonwood, and a smart man, a safe man, would have let her go into the dark and kept all of it. I put the map in her hands. I put my finger on the pass. I said in our stitched-up language the words we did have. Water, here, then here, danger, here. I traced the safe way. And then I put my hand flat on my own chest, and then flat on the map, on the trail, on the south. I am on this trail too, and I looked at her and said the one English word I'd never taught her because I'd never had the courage, and I didn't teach it to her then either. I just said it, and let it be a sound she didn't know so it would be safe to say. Please. She didn't know the word. but she knew the shape of a man begging. Outside, far up on the ridge, a horse nickered where no horse of mine should be. Cutter or Cutter's men moving into position in the dark. We were out of time, and I still didn't know if she'd let me come. We went south that same night, and I'll tell you plain, I was no help. She was the one who knew how to move in the dark without a lamp, how to walk the pony over rocks so it left no track, how to read the country by starlight. I knew the water and the washes. That was my whole worth on that trail, my one column in the ledger, the map in my head from years of unhappy work. So we made a trade of it the way we'd made a trade of everything. Her eyes at night, my map by day. Her patience, my water. It was the truest partnership of my life, and it was conducted almost entirely in silence, because sound carries in that country, and because we'd never needed many words anyhow. Cutter came after us. Of course he did. A professional doesn't let a 2-day investment ride off into the dark. We saw his dust on the second afternoon, far back, and Dassa's thumb went round and round on the bone handle. And I did sums in my head I didn't like: 3 men, good horses, and us with 1 sound pony and 1 worn saddle horse, and a widower who'd never fired at a man in his life. I need to tell you about the worst night, the 4th night, because it holds the heavy thing this whole story was walking toward. We were in the border hills by then, close to the pass, close to the line, close to where people are somewhere past this ridge, and the pony threw a shoe and came up lame again, the old bruise, the same near foreleg, and it could not carry her over the rock ahead. That was the arithmetic laid bare. 1 sound horse, 2 riders, cut her a half-day back in closing. The safe math, the ranch math, the ledger math was this. One of us rides the sound horse over the pass to her people and lives. One of us stays with the lame pony to slow Cutter or dies or both. And I want you to know that I had already decided in the space of 1 breath that the one who stayed would be me. I'd walked into this with my eyes open. I had a wife under a cottonwood and not much reason to see another spring. She had her people over the ridge and every reason. It was simple. It was almost a relief to have a debt I could finally pay in full. I put her up on the sound horse. I put the map in her hands, the reins in her hands. I pointed at the pass and said our word for come meaning go and don't stop, and I stepped back and slapped the horse's flank to send her. She hauled it up short, and she looked down at me from the saddle with her face gone hard and terrible, and she understood exactly the math I'd done, and she rejected it. She got down off the sound horse, and she took the bone knife she'd held on me the first night, the knife she'd set down in the straw, and she cut the saddle cinch and pulled the saddle off and threw it in the rocks, and she got the lame pony and the sound horse both, and she started up the pass on foot leading both, slow, so that we would go over together at the pace of the lamest thing among us or not at all. The reed that bends and doesn't break. She would not let the flood take me to spare herself. She had decided that at some point in the winter, the same as I had, and neither of us had ever said it, and now there was no time to argue it in a language we didn't share. So we went up the pass together on foot, leading 2 horses, 1 lame in the dark with Cutter closing, and it was the slowest and the most sure I have ever been of anything. Cutter caught us at the top. Just Cutter, he'd left Harl and Dell to rest the horses and come on alone, because a professional knows a lame pony can't run and doesn't need 3 guns to collect. He came up the far side of the pass on foot, rifle easy in his hands, that appraising gray look going over the 2 of us and the 2 horses, and the pass beyond that dropped down into Mexico, into her people's country, into the last quarter mile of a 100-mile run. Ezra, same mild voice as at my gate. You've made this expensive. I stepped in front of her. I had my rifle and I got it half up, and I want to tell you I was fast and brave, but the truth is Cutter was a professional, and I was a rancher, and he had his sights on my chest before mine cleared my hip, and we both knew how that math came out. Don't, Cutter said. I only get paid for her. I'd shoot for free and lose no sleep, but I'd rather not do free work. His eye flicked past me to Dassa. Step aside. She's worth a year's wages at the fort. You're worth a hanging if you don't. And here is the heavy thing. Here is the decision the whole winter was built to arrive at. I could step aside and live. She'd already tried to make me live twice, set me on the sound horse, cut the cinch, put herself between me and the flood over and over. Every part of her wanted me to live. And Cutter would take her to the fort, to Florida, to the swamp and the train, to wherever the country sent the people it had decided didn't count, and she would go the way she'd gone everywhere, the reed bending, alive. Alive. If I stepped aside, she'd be alive, and there's a kind of man who'd have called that love. I let her live. I didn't step aside. I did the thing I'd learned from her instead. The hawk thing. The practical, unpretty, wholehearted thing. I didn't raise my rifle at Cutter. He'd have killed me before it cleared. I turned fast, and I slapped the sound horse hard across the rump, and I shouted our word, her word, the one for come that we'd made mean go, and I put every ounce of the winter into it. And Dassa, the reed, the strategist, the woman who read every situation in one look, read this one too. She saw there was no version where we both got over. She saw me choose. And instead of arguing it, instead of bending back to save me one more time, she did the hardest thing, the thing that cost her more than the knife or the hawk or the whole 100 miles. She let me spend myself on her. She got on the horse and she went. Cutter swung his rifle to follow her, and I was already moving, already inside his reach. And I got a hand on the barrel and shoved it skyward as it went off, the shot cracking away into the stars over the pass. And then Cutter and I were down in the rocks, two middling men fighting ugly and desperate. And I am not going to tell you I won because I didn't, not really. He was better than me and stronger than me, but I only needed to lose slow. I only needed to cost him the quarter mile. I only needed to be the lame pony that makes the whole flood wait. I heard her horse's hooves go down the far side of the pass, into Mexico, into the country the bounties couldn't reach, growing faint, going where I couldn't. Same sound the hawk made, going up crooked and then flying. Cutter left me alive in the end, which surprised me. Broke 2 of my ribs and my nose and took my rifle and my horse and left me on the pass, because a professional doesn't do free work, and I wasn't worth the bullet once she was gone. "You crazy son of a bitch," he said, almost admiring, wiping his mouth, and rode back down for Harl and Dell. By the time the 3 of them came over the top, she was long past the line, and there's no bounty a man can collect in Mexico that's worth a war with the rurals. I walked home, took me 9 days. I don't remember most of them. I'm at my table now, and it's spring, and the wash is running, and there's a calf in the pen that a woman with different words once hauled out of the mud and then laughed at, and I have Marta's ledger open in front of me, and I've just written the only entry I've made in a month. I don't know if she reached her people. I have to tell you that because the ledger doesn't lie to make a man feel better, and I won't either. She rode over that pass into a country full of soldiers on both sides, and I have no way to know if she made the Sierra matter. No letter can come. No word will ever cross that I could read even if it did. She is either alive in the free mountains with the last of her people, or she is not, and I will die not knowing which. That's the price. I knew it when I slapped that horse. Some debts you pay in never knowing. But here is what I have. I have a word I can't pronounce that means the reed that bends and doesn't break. I have the memory of one cold hand over mine for the length of one breath. I have a garden out back growing things I don't have the English names for, that come up every spring now whether I tend them or not. And I have this, the last thing, the thing I turn over every night before the fire the way she turned that knife handle round and round. When she went over the pass, in the last second before the rocks took her from sight, she stopped the horse. She turned in the saddle. And across a distance I could no longer close, across 100 miles and 2 languages and a border and everything the world had put between us, she raised one hand. Not a wave, we didn't have waves. It was our word, the hand made into the reed, bending and springing back up. I bend, I don't break, I am still here. I have chosen to believe it means she made it. A man's memory lies to make him feel better, Marta always said, and the numbers won't do him that kindness. But there are no numbers for this one. There's no column in any ledger for a hand raised on a pass at dawn.